A Boeing 787 Dreamliner hovered over the Pacific Ocean for about an hour before returning to Los Angeles, sparking concern among passengers and aviation experts alike. How would you feel if the plane you believed to be the safest in the sky turned out to be hiding dangerous secrets? Once hailed as the future of air travel, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner was designed to revolutionize the industry with its cutting-edge technology and enhanced performance. However, recent revelations about its alarming flaws may lead us to question everything we thought we knew about aviation. What went wrong with this revolutionary aircraft? Let's uncover the truth behind. The 787 Dreamliner entered the aviation world as more than just a new aircraft. It was presented as a revolution in the sky. Boeing promised an airplane that would change how we travel, combining advanced engineering with a passenger experience unlike anything before. It was built mainly from carbon fiber composites instead of traditional aluminum, which made it lighter and stronger. This choice allowed the plane to burn about 20% less fuel compared to older models, lowering costs for airlines and reducing emissions for the planet. The Dreamliner's design was just as bold inside the cabin. Passengers would enjoy larger windows with electronic dimming, cleaner air through advanced filtration, and lower cabin altitude to make breathing easier and reduce fatigue. It was also noticeably quieter, giving long-haul travelers a calmer environment. Boeing marketed these features as the future of air travel, and the pitch worked. In its very first year, the company received over 800 orders from airlines around the world, including major carriers in the United States, Japan, and the Middle East. Airlines hoped the Dreamliner would not only cut operating costs, but also attract premium passengers who valued comfort. For a while, the aircraft lived up to the hype. The first flights impressed travelers with smooth rides and quieter cabins. Pilots praised its fuel efficiency, and airline executives highlighted the operational savings. Boeing's production lines worked at full speed to meet demand, and industry experts spoke of the Dreamliner as a long-term game-changer. It wasn't just a product, it was a symbol of modern engineering, sustainability, and innovation. The plane's sleek wings, with their distinctive upward curve, became an instant visual icon. The use of new electrical systems instead of traditional hydraulic ones was meant to make maintenance simpler and more reliable. Every detail was designed to signal progress and a break from the past. With so many firsts, the 787 seemed unstoppable, and Boeing's public image soared along with it. However, high demand meant that Boeing had to scale up production faster than ever before. New suppliers were brought in from different parts of the world, and assembly work was divided between multiple facilities. This global supply chain allowed faster output, but it also created new challenges. Each part had to meet extremely tight tolerances, and even the smallest deviation could have serious consequences. For passengers and most of the industry, these concerns remained invisible. The marketing narrative focused on beauty, efficiency, and comfort, while any early problems were quietly handled behind the scenes. To the public eye, the Dreamliner was still the safest and most advanced way to cross oceans. But the pressure to keep the orders flowing and the planes flying was immense. And when speed becomes the priority, small imperfections can slip through unnoticed, waiting for the moment they turn into something far more dangerous. So how did those early signs of trouble start to appear, and why were they ignored until it was almost too late? At first, the Dreamliner's image seemed untouchable. Passengers praised the comfort, airlines enjoyed the savings, and Boeing's marketing kept the spotlight on the plane's futuristic design. But under the smooth surface, production pressures were starting to create invisible risks. Boeing's promise to deliver hundreds of planes on time meant the company had to work at unprecedented speed. The manufacturing process was spread across a global supply chain, with different factories building different parts of the aircraft. Every section, from fuselage panels to wing components, had to fit together with precision measured in millimeters. In aviation, those small measurements matter more than most people realize. A gap only a few millimeters wide between panels can lead to stress points that grow over time, eventually becoming cracks that threaten the aircraft's structure. The Dreamliner's carbon fiber body, while stronger and lighter than aluminum, required exact alignment and bonding during assembly. Unlike metal, composites can hide internal flaws until they suddenly fail under pressure. To ensure safety, every completed aircraft should go through a meticulous inspection process. This involves checking each joint, testing the pressure resistance, and reviewing every fastener for proper placement. But as demand for the 787 surged, these steps began to face shortcuts. Internal reports from engineers revealed that some fuselage sections were not lining up as they should. Gaps were being filled in ways that didn't meet the strictest standards, and certain inspection steps were rushed to keep planes on schedule. Some employees raised concerns, warning that long-term safety could be at risk. Yet in a production environment driven by deadlines and shareholder expectations, those warnings didn't always reach the top. For the public, nothing seemed wrong. The flights were on time, and the plane still looked and felt like the marvel Boeing had promised. But in the background, small compromises were beginning to pile up. And in aviation, small compromises have a way of turning into big problems. Even with advanced materials and cutting-edge design, the 787 was not immune to the same fundamental truth that governs every aircraft. Safety depends on perfection. If a fastener is out of place or a panel is slightly misaligned, the stresses of thousands of flight hours can turn minor flaws into catastrophic failures. The signs were tiny inconsistencies in production, unusual wear patterns, and a few minor maintenance issues reported earlier than expected. These were red flags for engineers, but they were not dramatic enough to make headlines. Still, anyone who works in aircraft design knows that patterns like this rarely stop on their own. Once a production flaw becomes part of the process, it tends to repeat across multiple units. The question was no longer whether the Dreamliner had flaws, but how deep those flaws went. And soon, regulators would start asking the same thing. So when the FAA began to investigate, what they uncovered turned those quiet concerns into a global alarm. When the FAA launched its investigation into the Boeing 787, it wasn't looking for a headline-grabbing scandal. The goal was to ensure that the aircraft's structure met the highest safety standards. But what they found would change the conversation entirely. Inspectors focused on one of the most critical components of any airliner: the forward pressure bulkhead. This massive circular structure seals the front of the cabin, holding in pressurized air while the aircraft cruises at altitudes above 30,000 feet. If the bulkhead fails, the cabin can lose pressure in seconds, leaving pilots and passengers with little time to react. During routine checks, engineers discovered that the fasteners securing the bulkhead were not aligned within acceptable tolerances. In some cases, the gaps between parts were significantly larger than Boeing's own safety guidelines allowed. These gaps could lead to microscopic cracks forming over time. With every flight cycle, the pressure changes would cause those cracks to grow, eventually threatening the structural integrity of the plane. It was a slow-moving danger, but in aviation, slow-moving dangers are often the most lethal. The FAA's findings didn't stop at a single aircraft. Multiple Dreamliners showed similar issues, suggesting a systemic problem in the production process. This was no isolated oversight, it was a pattern. Boeing faced an immediate challenge. If the FAA declared the bulkhead design or assembly unsafe, entire fleets could be grounded overnight. Airlines that relied on the 787 for long-haul routes would face chaos, with canceled flights, stranded passengers, and mounting financial losses. Inside Boeing, executives scrambled to respond. Publicly, they expressed confidence in the Dreamliner's safety, promising swift inspections and necessary repairs. Privately, the tone was different. Every delay in addressing the issue risked further eroding the company's already fragile reputation. For the FAA, the next steps were clear. They issued an airworthiness directive, ordering inspections of all affected aircraft and immediate corrective actions. The directive was not a suggestion, it was a legal requirement. Airlines had to either prove their bulkheads met the standard or pull the aircraft from service until repairs were complete. For passengers, the headlines were unsettling. News outlets framed the story with phrases like potentially catastrophic failure and hidden danger in the skies. People who had flown on a Dreamliner began asking questions they'd never considered before. The timing couldn't have been worse for Boeing. The company was still recovering from the fallout of the 737 MAX disasters, and public trust was thin. Any hint of negligence risked triggering a new wave of scrutiny. Boeing's engineers worked around the clock, reinforcing bulkheads, replacing misaligned fasteners, and tightening quality control on new production. Yet the damage to the brand was already spreading. Airline partners demanded answers, regulators expanded inspections, and aviation analysts began to wonder if the Dreamliner's troubles were only beginning. The FAA had uncovered a weakness in one of the plane's most vital structures, but the deeper question was why that weakness existed in the first place. Was it the result of flawed engineering, careless assembly, or a corporate culture that valued speed over safety? The investigation was far from over, and the next revelations would make the bulkhead problem look like just the tip of the iceberg. So, what other hidden flaws had been quietly flying over our heads all this time? The forward pressure bulkhead was not the Dreamliner's first serious problem. Long before the FAA's latest findings, the 787 had already faced a series of setbacks that hinted at deeper issues. Only 2 years after its first commercial flight, the Dreamliner was grounded worldwide. The cause was a technology Boeing had promoted as a breakthrough: lithium-ion batteries. These batteries were lighter, more efficient, and designed to power key systems with less environmental impact. But in early 2013, they began overheating on multiple flights. In one high-profile case, a Japan Airlines 787 had to make an emergency landing after smoke filled the cockpit. Investigators found signs of thermal runaway, a chain reaction inside the battery that can lead to fire or even explosion. For safety officials, this was an unacceptable risk. The FAA took the extraordinary step of grounding the entire global fleet of Dreamliners until a solution was found. It was the first time in modern aviation history that such a drastic measure was taken for a brand new aircraft. Boeing responded quickly, redesigning the battery enclosure to contain potential fires and prevent overheating. The fix allowed the 787 to return to service, but the incident left a permanent mark on its reputation, and the problems didn't stop there. In the years that followed, reports surfaced about fuselage sections that didn't align properly. Some gaps were small, others larger, but all raised concerns about the long-term structural health of the planes. To address these issues, Boeing quietly set up shadow factories, special facilities where already built aircraft were sent for repairs. The company described these as routine adjustments, but the scale of the work told a different story. Entire sections had to be reworked, panels replaced, and fasteners realigned before the planes could fly again. This rework slowed deliveries and increased costs, but the bigger damage was to public trust. Passengers didn't see the repairs happening, but airlines and industry insiders did, and they remembered. Then, in 2024, another flaw surfaced, this time in the Dreamliner's communication systems. The VHF radios, which pilots used to talk to air traffic control, began switching frequencies on their own. During busy flight phases like takeoff and landing, this glitch could cause dangerous lapses in communication. Boeing issued a software update to fix the problem, but some airlines reported the issue persisted even after the patch. For pilots, the thought of losing contact with air traffic control at a critical moment was deeply unsettling. For passengers, the headlines added another reason to question whether the Dreamliner was as safe as advertised. Each of these incidents, taken alone, might have been dismissed as a rare technical glitch. But together, they painted a picture of a plane with a troubling track record. The 787 was supposed to be the pinnacle of modern aviation, yet it seemed to be constantly battling new and unexpected flaws. And with every new discovery, the gap between Boeing's promises and the reality in the skies grew wider. The FAA's bulkhead findings were only the latest chapter in a story that was starting to feel alarmingly familiar. So if these problems had been surfacing for over a decade, what would the long-term consequences be for Boeing and the airlines that relied on this aircraft? When the FAA released its findings on the forward pressure bulkhead, the shockwaves spread far beyond Boeing's factories. Airlines that depended on the 787 for long-haul routes suddenly faced an uncertain future. Grounding even a handful of these planes could throw entire schedules into chaos. Flights would be canceled, passengers stranded, and valuable slots at major airports left unused. For carriers, the financial impact could be staggering. The Dreamliner was chosen precisely because of its efficiency, and losing that advantage meant higher fuel bills and increased operational costs. Some airlines had invested heavily in 787 fleets, betting that the plane would serve them reliably for decades. Now they were forced to reconsider their strategy. Every hour a Dreamliner sat on the ground was lost revenue, and every maintenance check added to the bill. But the consequences weren't limited to the airlines. For passengers, the news eroded trust in Boeing's brand. Many began researching which aircraft their flights would use, a detail most people never bothered to check before. Social media amplified these concerns, with travelers sharing stories and asking whether it was safe to board a 787. Travel bloggers and aviation influencers picked up the topic, further fueling public anxiety. The timing could not have been worse for Boeing. Airbus, its biggest rival, was gaining momentum with the A350, a similarly sized, fuel-efficient aircraft with far fewer reported issues. Several airlines faced with delays and uncertainty began shifting orders from Boeing to Airbus. This shift wasn't just about performance, it was about perception. Airlines wanted to show their passengers that safety was their top priority, and switching to a competitor's aircraft was one way to send that message. In the stock market, Boeing's troubles triggered nervous reactions from investors. Each new report about 787 defects chipped away at the company's valuation. Analysts warned that restoring confidence would take years, not months. Regulators in other countries started their own inspections, creating a patchwork of safety reviews that Boeing had to navigate. The company now faced the challenge of not only fixing the bulkhead issue, but also proving that its overall manufacturing culture had changed. That meant more oversight, stricter quality checks, and potentially slower production. For a business already under financial strain, these measures would be costly. But perhaps the most lasting consequence was the damage to Boeing's relationship with its airline customers. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild in the aviation industry. Every order placed with Airbus was not just a lost sale, it was a vote of no confidence in Boeing's ability to deliver safe, reliable aircraft. The Dreamliner had started as a symbol of innovation and hope for the future of air travel. Now it risked becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of overpromising and under-delivering. And as the pressure mounted, Boeing had to face an uncomfortable truth. Fixing the plane was only half the battle. The real test would be whether they could fix the culture that allowed these failures to happen in the first place. So, what changes would Boeing be forced to make if it wanted to survive this crisis and reclaim its place in the skies? Inside Boeing's boardrooms, the conversation had shifted from fixing an aircraft to fixing the company itself. The technical flaws in the 787 were serious, but they were symptoms of a deeper issue. For years, critics had accused Boeing of putting production speed and shareholder returns ahead of engineering discipline. The Dreamliner's problems seemed to confirm those fears. Employees who once took pride in perfection now faced relentless pressure to meet deadlines. In such an environment, shortcuts were not just possible, they were inevitable. Fixing this would require more than replacing faulty parts. It meant rebuilding a corporate culture that had been eroded by years of cost-cutting and rushed schedules. Boeing announced a series of internal reforms aimed at restoring its reputation. The company increased the number of quality control inspections on each aircraft before delivery. It also brought more work back in-house, reducing dependence on far-flung suppliers whose oversight was harder to manage. Training programs for engineers and assembly crews were expanded, focusing on precision, accountability, and safety-first decision-making. Management was restructured, with new leadership brought in from outside the company to provide fresh perspectives. But cultural change is slow, and skepticism ran deep. Airline executives wanted proof that these reforms were more than just public relations. They wanted to see fewer defects, more transparency, and consistent reliability in every aircraft delivered. Boeing's engineers also pushed for design reviews to ensure that future aircraft would not inherit the same flaws. This meant longer development timelines, higher costs, and more testing before launch. For shareholders, these measures promised stability in the long run, but slower profits in the short term. It was a trade-off Boeing could no longer avoid. Meanwhile, competitors like Airbus were capitalizing on Boeing's troubles. The A350 gained new orders, and Airbus was positioning itself as the safer, more dependable choice. Boeing had to counter this narrative by showing measurable progress. That included inviting regulators and airline representatives into its factories to observe the new processes firsthand. The company also launched an open communication initiative, regularly updating partners on inspection results and ongoing improvements. Internally, morale was a mixed picture. Some employees felt encouraged by the renewed focus on craftsmanship, while others doubted whether leadership's promises would last once the headlines faded. Changing the mindset of a global aerospace giant would take years, not months. And every new incident, no matter how small, risked undoing that progress. Still, Boeing understood that its future depended on making these changes stick. The Dreamliner could not remain a symbol of overreach and broken trust. It had to become the turning point in a story of redemption. Whether Boeing would succeed in that transformation was an open question, but the stakes could not be higher. Because in aviation, your reputation is your license to fly. So as the reforms began, the final question loomed large. Would passengers ever feel truly safe stepping onto a Dreamliner again? Or would the scars of its troubled history never fully fade? The 787 Dreamliner began its life as a vision of progress. It promised a cleaner, quieter, and more efficient future for air travel. It was meant to be the aircraft that would bridge continents while reducing the toll on the environment and the human body. And for a time, it delivered exactly that. But beneath the promises and the marketing, flaws began to surface, small at first, then more serious and eventually impossible to ignore. From battery fires to misaligned fuselage sections, from secret repair facilities to faulty communication systems, the list of problems grew over the years. The forward pressure bulkhead issue was only the latest in a string of warnings that something was fundamentally wrong. Each incident chipped away at the confidence of airlines, passengers, and regulators. Each investigation revealed not just technical problems, but cracks in Boeing's corporate culture. Aviation thrives on trust, and when that trust is broken, it takes more than engineering to repair it. Boeing now finds itself at a crossroads. It can choose to see the Dreamliner's troubled history as a wake-up call, an opportunity to rebuild both its aircraft and its reputation. Or it can allow these problems to define the brand for decades to come. The company has started to take steps toward reform, tightening quality control, restructuring management, and placing a renewed focus on safety. But the success of these efforts will not be measured in press releases or quarterly earnings. It will be measured in the confidence of the passengers who step onto its planes, in the decisions of airlines to keep ordering its models, and in the willingness of regulators to certify its future designs without hesitation. For now, the 787 continues to fly, carrying millions of people across oceans every year. Most of those flights will be uneventful, the way air travel should be. Yet the shadow of its past lingers, and with every takeoff and landing, the question remains: can Boeing truly leave behind the culture that allowed these failures to happen? Or will history repeat itself when the next crisis arrives? Because in the skies, there is no room for second chances. A single overlooked detail can separate a safe journey from a disaster. And for passengers, the decision to trust a plane is not just about engineering. It's about believing that the company behind it values their lives above all else. So the next time you book a ticket and see Boeing 787 Dreamliner listed as your aircraft, will you feel reassured by its promise of comfort and efficiency, or will you remember the headlines and wonder what might still be hidden beneath its sleek exterior?